Good morning, everyone. So, our bold law and truth is actually a new one in the new curriculum. And it says, I own things, things don't own me. It's a very, very interesting one, but I think is really relevant for us today, especially in our culture when we got so much going on in social media. We feel like our success is dictated on how people view us, how people see us. And so the essence of this law is things don't have permission to define your happiness or your self-worth. So don't be attached to what you own or let it become your identity. So that's a really, really powerful statement. This idea that money and things do not define who we are. And I think the perfect example is to look at Bill Gates, right? One of the richest men in the world. His net worth right now is $106 billion. And on his Gates Foundation website, he started reflecting a little bit about this idea of wealth, money, and what it means to him after he accumulated it all. And so he says on his website, I'm just going to read a little bit of it. And it says, when I first began thinking about how to give away my wealth, I did what I always do when I start a new project. I read a lot of books. I read books about great philanthropists, their foundations to form my decisions on how exactly to give back. And then he goes on and he says one of the best things he read was a 1889 essay by Andrew Carnegie called The Gospel of Wealth. And he says in there that it makes the case that the wealthy have a responsibility to return their resources to society, right? As it was a radical idea at the time that laid the groundwork for philanthropy. And in the essay, Carnegie argues that the man who dies uh, and dies and thus the rich dies disgraced, right? He goes, the man who dies, rich dies disgraced. And he goes, he spent a lot of time thinking about that. And what he wanted to say and th have people think about him is when he dies, he was determined not to say that people would say that he died rich, right? That's not what he wanted to be remembered for. And he goes on to say there were too many problems in this world for him to really hold on to all those resources. So the Gates Foundation actually has this strategy and this plan to give away everything over the next 20 years. And my thought process was this: if money really was that important to our happiness, if wealth really meant everything, well, then Bill Gates would have held on to it. But for someone who had accumulated it all, he looked at what he had and says, guess what? It's not worth holding on to. He was not going to be defined by it. He didn't want to be remembered for he died rich. And he's starting to give it all away. And so for us, I think we need to stop and slow down a little bit and rethink, how should we view wealth, right? And how do we view possessions and what is our relationship with it right now? And our challenge for us, right, is realizing that, if we put all our eggs in that basket in determining our happiness, we know that wealth can be gone in just a second. I remember one time when I was going back to school, I quit my job and we were going to use our savings for it, for my tuition and all that. And I was like, you know what? I just want a little bit more. So I took 20K of my savings and I put it in the stock market. This is like literally before I started school. And in a few weeks, I lost 20%. And I pulled it out immediately. And I was like, oops, that was not a good idea, right? Our wealth could be gone just like that. And actually, even our health can be gone in a second as well. So one of my mentors, he lives out in Southern California. Just this past week, had a cardiac arrest, right? And on his Facebook page, he goes, my heart stopped. I had a cardiac arrest, a sudden near fatal event, and his week was full of a blur of chest compressions, IVs, hospital monitors, and slow recoveries. And then he wrote, my body's still bruised and swollen, but I'm breathing. I get to live. And I think sometimes we're like going, oh, well, you know what? I have all the time to spend my money. I have all the time to make money. And our wealth can be lost in a second, and our health can be lost in a second. And so again, it's just reframing this idea of what does it mean to us? What is our relationship with it? I remember reading a book and it actually says if we let a good thing become a God thing, that is a bad thing, right? If we let a good thing become a God thing, that is a bad thing. And we've all heard it before, right? It's not money is the root of all evil, but it's the love of money that's the root of all evil. When it becomes so important in our lives that it drives everything that we do. And the challenge for us is it's when these possessions, these things, when we start laying aside our family to pursue things and wealth, that's when it becomes a problem. When we take advantage of clients to gain more, when we hold on to what we earn with a closed hand and we struggle with generosity versus having an open hand with it. When we look down on others because they don't have as much as we do. When we cannot celebrate the success of others because we have to be number one in our production, right? That's when we know that a good thing has become a God thing and therefore it's become a bad thing. So the reality is when we think about it, like why you do something determines what you do, right? So we have to always look at our motives and our motives eventually determine our direction. And so when we look at let money and things define us and ultimately become our very why, then we're doing things centered on our own personal gain versus a servant posture. But it's not just money and things can define us, right? We can also let our successes or past failures that really define us as well. So I remember when I was transitioned to full time in real estate, right? I was sitting in Teresa's office. We had just closed the church that we were leading. And she came up to me and she goes, "Hey, Daniel, I want you to know that you're not defined by this event." Right? Reminded me, you are not a failure. And I knew it in my head, but I needed the reminder, I needed the affirmations that what had happened doesn't mean that I'm worthless, right? What had happened doesn't mean that I'm going to continue to fail. And most importantly, what happened doesn't mean that I'm not loved, right? It was a hard time for our family. My kids were old enough to see it. They were old enough to understand it. And it was hard for them to see their dad go through it. It was really emotional, right? Incredibly challenging times. And yet I also realized that I couldn't let it define me because if I did, then I was passing on a lesson to my kids that failure does define who we are. So any of all of these, like, our again, our career, our monetary possessions, our things, they can feel like solid foundations, but we all realize that none of them are permanent, right? Any of them could change without warning. And so if we base our identity based on things like success and wealth, physical appearance, we're just going to be setting ourselves up for incredible disappointment. So here's the lesson at the end, right? Don't give anyone or anything the power to define you. And in our current market, even if business is slow, don't let that define you. So how do we set a strong foundation, right? What are the principles that we can do, that we can embrace that allows us to have that solid foundation? I think the first one is knowing this, how we're wired. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. Know that you're fearfully and wonderfully made. Scientists estimate that the adult human body contains 16 trillion cells, right? They're all carefully organized to give us life. That's incredible. A number of 16 trillion. And then when you consider the other stats, right? The nose can recognize 10,000 different aromas. The tongue has about 6,000 taste buds. The brain contains 10 billion nerve cells, and each nerve cell connects to another 10,000 cells, right? I mean, this literally is, we each have a unique DNA blueprint. And if we were to write out our individual blueprint, our DNA in a book, it would require an estimated 200,000 pages. That is absolutely amazing. So know this, you are fearfully and wonderfully made. But secondly, know that since we are uniquely made, it also means that we are a masterpiece. An artist, when he creates a picture, he never paints the same picture twice, right? It's not a mass production. And so knowing us as human beings, each one of us we're not mass produced. We're made unique, we're made one of a kind, and each one of us is a masterpiece. So since we're uniquely made, we are masterpiece. And then lastly, our uniqueness means we have a special purpose in this world. Right? So not everyone's wired to be a CEO, not everyone's wired to be, in a certain position, right? Based on our gifting, our wiring, and our passions. We have a unique place in this narrative of life. Just like a snowflake, right? It has no two snowflakes are the same. So the same with our genetic makeup. So we got to embrace who we are. We got to embrace our role. We got to embrace our time and our place. Things don't have permission to define your happiness or your self-worth. So don't be attached to what you own or let it become your identity. Wrap up with the bold law again. I own things, but I don't let things own me.